I'm walking up Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C., in between the U.S. Capitol and the White House. It's the same route incoming American presidents take after their inauguration. Jimmy Carter famously decided to get out of the presidential limousine along with his family and walk the route, a tradition that's been followed by every president since. That walk was and is remembered as one of the iconic moments of Carter's presidency. It embodied the authentic, uncelebrity appeal that made his campaign so successful at connecting with everyday Americans. One of my favorite things about making this podcast has been learning about President Carter not just from historians and scholars, but hearing stories from people who were there when history happened. On this episode of Recollecting Carter, we'll hear how a high school drum major came to be on the platform when Carter gave his victory speech after the 1976 election, and what it was like to march in that inaugural parade.
I, Jimmy Carter, do solemnly swear.
The time for racial discrimination is over.
That I will faithfully execute
an undiminished, ever-expanding American dream.
The office of President of the United States.
The struggle for human rights overrides all differences of color or nation or language.
And will, to the best of my ability,
It is a crisis of confidence.
preserve, protect, and defend
To remove the light of war, the threat of war, would be the overwhelming dream that I would have.
the Constitution of the United States.
We will not learn how to live together in peace by killing each other's children.
So help me God.
I'm Terry Johnson. I'm the chair of the Department of Visual and Performing Arts at Clayton State University in Morrow, Georgia.
Tell us a little bit about your background, how you have a personal connection with Carter, and I think you've got a specific story that is going to be really interesting for us.
Well, I grew up in the household of two Georgia teachers. My dad moved or changed positions from teaching in the School of Education at Georgia Southern College to being the academic dean at Georgia Southwestern College in Americus, Georgia, when I was about 8 years old. So we moved to Americus, and one of my early memories there was our dad taking us to the National Guard Armory, which was, just as you imagine, a small town kind of open building in Americus, where a local farmer was going to appear and announce that he was running for governor of the state of Georgia. So my first time meeting Jimmy Carter came at that announcement. I don't remember the year of that, but it would have been shortly after we moved to Americas. My dad got very interested in Jimmy Carter at first because he was an alumnus of Georgia Southwestern. It had, like many of Georgia's state colleges, it had begun as a two-year college, and Jimmy Carter attended it as a two-year college in preparation then to go to Georgia Tech, where, of course, everyone knows that he studied nuclear engineering. So, of course, my dad was interested in him, but then, of course, we became fans. We became followers of his political ideas and believed very much in especially the ideas that he had about racial reconciliation, about racial integration, in his kind of incorruptible spirit that stayed true through his time in the State House and in the White House, where there was never any allegation of corruption as a politician. And, of course, he was a neighbor. Plains is about 7 or 8 miles outside the city limits of Americus. Americus is the county seat for Sumter County. So Plains residents were very much our neighbors. We even had Plains kids who came into the city schools of Americus to attend school because the Plains school system was part of the Sumter County system, and the schools were much smaller, didn't offer all the extracurriculars and things like that. So we grew up knowing the Carters, and his sons are a little bit older than me. His daughter Amy is a little bit younger than me. So I didn't grow up with his kids, but I had a good friend in high school from Plains who was Amy's babysitter. And that, of course, was quite a calling card after he became president. And she was very proud of having played a role in Amy's upbringing.
You've made a life and career out of music, and you have an interesting story that connects with Carter and your early musical career. So tell us a little bit about that.
When I was in junior high and high school, I was one of those kids that we now affectionately call a band geek. Everything about me was band. I was a percussionist and played in, of course, the junior high and then senior high bands. And as a junior and senior in high school, became the drum major of the band. Well, it was interesting that as Carter had served as governor, he had become kind of a household name, and it wasn't unusual to see him at, ribbon cuttings and at speaking for commencement and that kind of thing. But I remember very well being in high school, being at church supper one Wednesday night, like everyone, of course, went to, and somebody came in the door and said, "You're not going to believe this, but Jimmy Carter just announced he's running for president." And we all had the biggest laugh about that. We thought, a peanut farmer from Sumter County running for president. Of course, we were proven wrong, and it wasn't long before we were on the bandwagon wholeheartedly. But as a high schooler who was involved in the high school band, we immediately started getting involved in the campaign because there would be a rally, there would be a parade, there would be an announcement that all were being generated out of either Plains, Georgia, at that very familiar railroad depot there on the one street that runs through the center of Plains, or perhaps even in Americus, where I remember being involved in the opening of the library and Jimmy Carter being there as a presidential candidate. The library at Georgia Southwestern, where my dad was an administrator, is the James Earl Carter Library, named for Jimmy Carter's father, who was a board member of the college. And so it wasn't unusual to be around him and to be doing something musical. And so pretty soon our band directors got an arrangement of the song "Happy Days Are Here Again," which was the campaign slogan song, and we memorized it and we pitched up and played it as many times as sometimes once or twice a week throughout my junior and senior years in high school. And during the summer of 1976, which was the summer between those junior and senior years for me, there were campaign rallies just about every Tuesday night. And we even gave our time in the summer, even though we weren't in school. We would, as many of us as were available, would go down to Plains. The Carters would have gone out on what came to be known as the Peanut Brigade. They would take the Amtrak train or something like that and go to some part of the country where they were campaigning. And then they would return. They would do it with volunteers who went over the weekend. And so they would return to Plains by Monday or Tuesday, and they'd have a big rally. And there we would be playing "Happy Days Are Here Again." And it became our summer kind of fun thing that we did. Well, when school started, the Democratic convention had happened. He was the nominee. It was a very close race between him and President Ford. And those rallies continued. And in addition to playing for our high school football games and all the normal high school band things, we spent a lot of time in Plains. And we spent enough time down there that the campaign staff, especially the local office, pretty much came to view us as part of the campaign and would not hesitate to call our director and ask for us to be present, and we would always oblige if we could. And so it came to be that on election night in November of 1976, we were there, and we were there all night. We had buses, even though we had many times we had just driven ourselves out to Plains to play, but this time we brought school buses so that they could run with the heaters going, because it was a very cold night in November. And we would play. We played, not just "Happy Days Are Here Again," but a lot of songs to entertain the crowd. Plains, which has 600 or 800 residents, had, thousands and thousands of people roaming the downtown area. And so we were stationed at one end of the main street, and we played as frequently as they asked us to. As the night went on and the tension grew, it was clear that it was a very close race. we just continued to play, and especially play when the news coverage would roll. And then in between, we'd go to the buses, and they would turn them on, and we would warm up with the heat or doze off. And then, 45 minutes later, we would pile out and get our instruments and play again. And somewhere along in that series of times that we played, we were standing there. As the drum major, I was directing the band, and someone came up to me from the campaign staff, and they were carrying a press pass, which you think now of the credentials people have to be around the president, and it's a laminated, probably barcoded special badge, and they've been through a vetting process and all. Well, this was a cardboard cutout, black and white printed thing with a string on it, and I hung it around my neck, and they said they're asking for you up at the railroad depot, the headquarters. And the reason was that I was a pianist. And growing up, I played for everything in town. I played for church services and for beauty pageants and for the Rotary Club, and just about every kind of thing. And in that small town, there weren't a lot of us around who could do those kinds of things. And so everyone thought of me as the local pianist. There was a man in the campaign, a volunteer, who also taught at Georgia Southwestern with my parents, or my dad, and his daughter was my friend and was in our high school band. And he was kind of a local, well-known singer. Just as I was frequently playing for things, he was frequently singing at things. And so they had decided that he would lead the crowd in singing God Bless America when the Carters arrived. The Carters, I believe, were in Atlanta, maybe at their national headquarters, and were flying down and going to appear before the cameras in planes. And it was at least insider knowledge inside the railroad depot there, with the very local, very small group of campaign staff that I ended up standing with, that the election was turning Carter's way, and it wasn't going to be long before it was called for him. So I had no sheet music. I didn't play God Bless America by ear. I'm not sure I had ever played it in my life. So they kind of cleared the people away from the railroad platform with the cameras not running. And I went out there to the piano and pecked away and figured out the chords and the melody of God Bless America in the key that this singer was likely to need it, and tried to figure out, how to play God Bless America on national TV with no sheet music. And sure enough, it went just as they had suspected. They called the election for Carter. The crowd went crazy. The cameras all started rolling, and they announced that the Carters were on their way from Atlanta and would be there shortly. And so the crowd all gathered in front of this railroad platform where the piano was. The piano was directly behind the speaker's lectern. So I stood at the piano so that I could sit down on the bench and play when the time came. And the platform started to fill up with people. There was a small choir there ready to sing, the choir from Andrew College down in Cuthbert, Georgia. There were all kinds of local people, most of whom had been friends of Jimmy Carter since childhood and were volunteers in the campaign. There was me, and there was the gentleman who was going to sing. Well, the crowd was so loud and so crazy that when the Carters arrived, we attempted to start God Bless America, but it was completely inaudible, even to us. There was no one going to calm down and sing God Bless America, and we never played or sang the song, but it's what made it necessary for me to be standing there. So the Carters and Jimmy's very famous mother, Miss Lillian Carter, his brother Billy, who had come to notoriety running the local gas station and selling his own beer, all of those people, the children of Jimmy and Rosalind Carter, we're all standing there together, and Jimmy and Rosalind arrive and stand at the speaker's lectern. And it just so happened that because they told me to, I was standing right behind him. And when he appeared on national television to accept that he had won the presidency, to give his victory speech, I just happened to be standing right behind him in my drum major uniform. The next day, the phone rang all day with friends from various places calling my parents and saying, what in the world was Terry doing standing there with Jimmy Carter? And the answer was, it was kind of Forrest Gump. I just happened to be there where they told me to stand, and that happened to be it. that night. As the night ended, we all went home. It was 5 or 6 in the morning, and we were all exhausted. And of course, looking forward to the next step in the progression of his becoming president. And it wasn't very long until they started planning the inauguration, and our band director got the call that we were invited to lead the inaugural parade. I think inaugural parades, if I'm not mistaken, they are led by the armed services bands, but then the first of the representatives of the 50 states in the parade would be us as the home state, and we would march in the inauguration. So, of course, that became a lifetime thrill for all of us. And years later, we've recently been reminiscing, some of my classmates and I, thanks to social media, have been able to share photographs from that time and reminisce about it and enjoy the fact that we were part of that historical event so long ago. We were delayed in driving our buses to Washington by a cold storm that hit the entire East Coast. Our drivers labored, driving all night. We got there in time for our commitments. We were interviewed on Good Morning America at like 6 or 7 in the morning, I believe on the steps of the Supreme Court, maybe, or the Library of Congress, one of the great buildings. We lined up on ice on those steps and tried to march down the steps, playing our instruments in the cold and not fall on the ice. And the correspondent who was interviewing us on Good Morning America was Bruce Jenner, who had recently been an Olympian and was starting a media career. Of course, now Caitlyn Jenner. Then we went and lined up for the parade. Of course, they staged us ready to march down Pennsylvania Avenue. And the parade was a little bit later than we expected starting, since we were the beginning of the parade. Standing in the cold, we didn't want to stand there any longer than we had to without moving. But of course, the reason it was delayed was the iconic instance where Jimmy and Rosalind Carter emerged from their limousine and walked down Pennsylvania Avenue and met with the American people. And that seems like a normal thing now. They even did a kind of facsimile of it recently with President Biden, even though with social distancing and security, there wasn't actually a parade crowd, but he still got out and walked. And I think it's thanks to the meaningfulness of Jimmy Carter on the heels of Watergate scandal, representing this kind of fresh air and connection with the average American walking down Pennsylvania Avenue. And so we followed close behind and marched down the parade route, of course, playing Happy Days Are Here Again. And then made our way home. And we were so fortunate at America's High School that we had an English teacher and a teacher who managed all of the yearbook and those kinds of things, who recognized the significance of the event and took pictures and interviewed people and created a souvenir book that they had printed for all of us. And so I still have in my library great mementos of that time that I wouldn't have had any other way because I was busy and couldn't be taking pictures myself.
That's such a great story, Terry. Thank you so much for sharing. Recollecting Carter is produced by me, Jason Lee Guthrie, with support from Georgia Humanities and the Liebner Cooper Family Foundation. Original music and sound design by Joel Corey. Logo design by Whitney Matheson. Archival media provided by the Carter Center. Special thanks to my intern Michael Smith and my students at Clayton State University who have contributed to this podcast. You can connect with the show online at recollectingcarter.com.